They gave me books to study, and books that I would never get in a typical economics class. It began to open up my eyes to the political realities of things. And as time went on, engaging in trying to form a new political formation in the black community, i.e. the Black Panther Party, it was so important about understanding the world about you, and understanding, we said in those days, understanding the enemy, or the man. It was so important to be a student of history, and a student of politics, and a student of economics. And so that was part of my personal upbringing that I never left. And as it moved into academia, teaching and so forth, it was something very important that I tried to impart with my students and whatever I was teaching. And what that, as a footnote, what that meant was the evolution of my teaching mathematics meant that I had to present mathematics as a human endeavor, and realizing that mathematics is basically the only course in the world that's taught without history, but it is embedded in history. And so pedagogically, it meant how do you begin to teach math so that people understand that the people did it, and that the people did it. If people did it, you can understand it, you know. So that was a piece of it. And history, and particularly struggling in the United States in the Black Liberation Movement, was an important organizing tool, and particularly when we saw that in SNCC and the Panther Party. The pamphlets that were done by SNCC for children in their freedom schools and so forth was laden with history. And so I became a student of history. And I saw that history, teaching history, and utilizing history and organizing became an essential component to pushing our movement forward in terms of helping to embed movement concepts, radical concepts within the Black community.
Yeah, I hope we get a chance for some discussion here, but yeah, I mean, clearly, I think the right movement is practice, theory, practice. Not theory, practice, theory, but clearly practice, theory, practice. And my activist background had, you know, as stupid as we were back in the day, you know, we did some good organizing, as young people are continuing to do today, that has helped give me some perspective on the debates that theorists get into today, and, you know, have some kind of critical purchase on the latest big debates among the theorists, and whether those are really the important ones for people on the ground to be worried about. I think practice gives our theoretical agenda, it gives us an agenda. What do we really need to figure out? What do we really need to have the luxury, if we can, of thinking through, of doing the historical work, of doing the theoretical work? So it should give us an agenda, and it should give us some critical purchase on you know, the stupid theoretical puzzles that too much of higher education is, you know, involved in. And I think too many people in higher education have become professors, went to high school and then college and then college and then college and then teach. And it doesn't lead to good scholarship to do that, to never step outside of the academy, I think.
I think this is an interesting question, and I've addressed it already in talking about the importance of political education. But I think what I've realized as a graduate student at the CUNY Graduate Center is there isn't this clear demarcation between the ivory tower and the communities that we're organizing in. And these worlds are actually fluid, and there's an interchange between the two. And even, I mean, speaking from my personal experiences, as all of us know, the university is a site of production. we're all workers in the university, and we obviously have different levels. There's different levels of privilege within the university and in terms of, jobs, but our jobs are kind of becoming more and more sparse. And the reason I went back to school was because I needed a job, basically, because it's so hard to find work in these community organizations these days. They're being defunded. So I think it wasn't necessarily just because, I enjoy it and I'm glad that I made that decision, but I think there's just, I'm just using this example as there isn't this separation between the ivory tower and reality. And I really like Fanon's idea in Wretched of the Earth of the colonized intellectual, and that's how I identify as kind of being part of these different worlds, as being oppressed, but then also having the privileges of a university education. Hopefully one day I'll have a PhD, and kind of the ambiguity of that position as a colonized intellectual, I think has been, thinking about it that way has been really informative in my work.
You should answer your question.
I'm just a neutral chair.
There's no such thing. Well, yes, for me it was this way. I don't know if I chose it, but it was practice, theory, etc. I became radical, in practice, because I was from a radical family, but then I tried to deserve it, the title, during the dictatorship in Greece, and then in France, but then after the dictatorship, I went back to make revolution. We were stupid but useful without making a revolution. So even when I taught, in Greece there was prohibition to teach in public schools for the left. There was you had to sign very terrible things, and so I became a high school teacher in a private school. But then also the pleasure I took in education was very much related to the practice. And then we had the feminist movement in Greece after the dictatorship, and I started doing research because there was no history of feminism in Greece, but without having any idea of becoming academic. And then I wanted to know if there were other works like that. So I went to France, and then I made a PhD because it was the only way to have a grant. And I have to say that on the one hand, practice was very important for my teaching and writing, but teaching has been also very important for me to rethink what was the practice I had, particularly since I got this job in Paris 8, Saint-Denis, and in this particular moment in which students, the first generation of bizarre French students, ex-colonials and colored people, etc., started asking questions that were not in the program. So I have to say yes, that I couldn't. This is the way it worked, and this is the way it becomes also a pleasure.
I went back to school after a long time not being in school and being an activist, and I think it's been very useful in terms of not going totally insane, but also, having some relationship to the questions. But I also think that one of the nice things about sort of coming from the left with its own sort of orthodoxies, even in my generation, someone told me to allow myself to be unfaithful to my own sort of ideas and beliefs that came out of my activism and came out of my sort of left education. And I think that's been actually really fun and interesting, and you know, to not see everything as either or, you know, that Foucault is completely irreconcilable with Marx and all of that stupid stuff that I think is not very useful. So I think, but ultimately, I think my allegiances are in my writing to people doing the work on the ground, and you know, who are facing all these questions.
Okay, we only have less than 10 minutes left. I wondered whether anybody from the audience wanted to ask any questions, raise any issues. Do I see any hands? Yes.
Basically, I'm more of a cultural worker. Asian American community. So I have direct experience. What do you like Chinatown as a more important representative of Asian writers? Iris Chang wrote Chinese in America. The story Iris Chang writing the history of Chinese in America and their tragic ending. She was a role model, and she took the responsibility of a lot of political world issues, besides the writing the book of Rape of Nanking. And I mean, I don't know if you use her book as a historical writing of the Chinese in America, because her form of expressionism is a lot more clearer of what went on with the Chinese in America, which is also effective of racism here, and now the gentrification of Chinatown that's occurring. So, I mean, you know, a lot of subjects haven't been covered, and especially being a cultural worker, I don't understand why you think multiculturalism is dead.
Thank you. Okay.
Yes, I agree that I maybe gave the Tiger Mother a little too much play. This is kind of part of my process of trying to understand why that's all people are saying right now about Asians, or that's the dominant ideology about Asians in the United States, and it's what's being covered. So I agree, gentrification, that's not being talked about in the media, and that's a huge issue in Chinatown today, and that's what CAV is working on. It's organizing the Chinatown Tenants Union to fight against gentrification. So I think just what's happening is this dominant discourse and in the media is really hiding the struggles of working class Asians today. And it's masking the class differences. And I hope that my talk or my comments have made that clear, is that there are real working class Asian struggles that we need to historicize, we need to theorize, and that's a lot of what my work and teaching is about, is historicizing and theorizing the daily experiences and the struggles and the social movements of working class Asians. And yeah, the gentrification in Chinatown, CAV is also organizing Southeast Asian refugee youth in the Bronx. And there's a lot of very real war traumas and poverty due to relocation following the wars in Southeast Asia. And these are all part of imperialism, colonialism, war, white supremacy, capitalism, all kind of influencing the lived experiences of Asians in the US today. Oh, and then multiculturalism. I mean, some people think that there is potential in multiculturalism. I don't necessarily think that that language is the language that I would choose to use. I would prefer, I mean, some people have talked about polyculturalism, which is kind of providing for all people of different races and cultures to live together and not have to assimilate to a dominant white culture. People say we're not a melting pot, we're a tossed salad. So I just think this idea of multiculturalism really needs to be challenged, because the way that I have been hearing it used is not helpful to challenge white supremacy. I think there's other conceptualizations that we can have.
We had a panel at St. John's. Sam was on it. Bill Sales, Angela Dillard, and Juan Battle, yeah. The panel was called, "Is the Talented Tenth Still a Relevant Concept, or has the black bourgeoisie gone crazy?" And so I was addressing this to Laurel when she clearly enunciated this distinction between working class and middle class Asians. And I wondered if there was anything like the Talented Tenth concept, which originally emerged as sort of a middle class responsibility, but seemed to have morphed into a understanding of the nature of racial capitalism and the common interests that were generated within the context of understanding of racial capitalism, and how capitalism evolved from was that race was invented with the formation of capitalism as a way to degrade the labor and the humanity of people of color, but also to justify that very process. So, the Talented Tenth. Any other questions?
No, it was good.
Who was it?
Is there a Talented Tenth equivalent?
Oh,
Yeah, I was addressing Sameh.
okay.
But
I haven't heard people talking about a talented tenth. I mean, I think amongst middle class Asians, I mean, something that we need to understand is that people of color are just as susceptible to being racist as white people are, despite the fact that we encounter racism. So I think there's a lot of racism in the Asian community. Okay, yes, and it's related to social class as well. They all kind of interplay. So I don't know that there's an equivalent to a talented tenth, but there is racism that's connected with class.
Okay, so no, sorry, two questions, and let's spread things around. Okay, any other hands then? Well, I guess you get your second question. Okay.
I mean, the difference, capitalism now, China has, we have blue chip Chinese artists who don't know anything about Western art. I had to send modern art magazines to a Chinese artist so he can get updated. And now they're making millions of dollars and I'm not. I mean, I studied Western art history, you know, so I can learn what's that about. Then I went to third world countries, traveled, learned the culture, and tried to, you know, use that in my artwork too, basically. But there's no sell. And presently, I don't know why I'm targeted as, I live in a nice neighborhood out of choice, but I'm being evicted. So what's that all about?
Okay, if there are no more questions, I think our panel deserves a round of applause.